Chair recognizes Ms. Stansbury from New Mexico for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to welcome Mr. Dodaro. It's wonderful to have you here today, and thank you to all the staff who are joining us. Mr. Chairman, I just want to take a moment to say thank you for having this hearing. This is exactly the kind of hearing that this committee should be having, is actual oversight and the fiscal responsibilities of the federal government. And I'm particularly grateful to have all of you here and to have this discussion as a former Senate committee employee and a former examiner at OMB. I'm very familiar with your work, and I've actually worked with a number of you over the years, so it's great to have you here today. I want to start out by saying, as the representative for New Mexico's 1st Congressional District, many of the items that are in the high-risk list for this year are items that, of course, New Mexicans experience every single day. Of the programs and items that are listed under high risk, issues around tribal communities and their access to health care, funding for the Bureau of Indian Education, issues around access to disabilities programs through Medicaid and through the VA system, and of course, many of the issues around military spending and the other issues that have been discussed this morning. So I want to dive in on some of these issues here, but I do want to take a moment to amplify on some of the comments that were made earlier, in that it's particularly peculiar to be having this hearing this week, as we learned just this morning in the wee hours of the night last night, the GOP in the Rules Committee dropped their version of the debt ceiling negotiation, which is really a ransom note for many of the programs that we're talking about that are covered under this report. In fact, in the name of balancing the debt ceiling, the GOP is proposing to cut for 10 years federal programs across the board. And in the GAO's high-risk report, it's acknowledged over and over again across the hundreds of pages of this report that part of why we've made progress on the high-risk list is because we've been making investments, and particularly congressional investments in these programs. And in particular, I want to highlight those investments in climate change, since one of the proposals in the GOP's proposal this week is to gut the Inflation Reduction Act, as well as other programs. In a 2019 report that the GAO published, it was estimated that by 2040, that climate would cost the United States $315 billion a year. And the GAO said in this report that for every single dollar that we spent on climate change as the federal government, it would save the federal government $11. That's an 11-to-1 investment. So when we hear arguments like we have this morning that investments in climate action are a waste of taxpayer dollars, they are literally saving taxpayer dollars by ensuring that we are mitigating financial and fiscal risk for the federal government down the road. And in fact, the report that you've issued actually states that. In fact, I want to take a direct quote from the report. It says that congressional action has helped to improve this high-risk area, and then goes on to talk about the ways in which the infrastructure bill and presumably the Inflation Reduction Act are actually going to help mitigate fiscal risk to the government. So I really wanted to amplify that this ransom note that the GOP has issued this week on gutting these vital social programs, climate programs, are really going to undermine the fiscal responsibility of the federal government. But I do want to allow the opportunity for you to share some of the findings of the report, especially around climate change. I know there were 5 key areas that were in need of improvement, particularly around government-wide planning and technical assistance to our communities. It's something that I work on every day. I have a number of bills that I'm working on. And so, Mr. Dodaro, could you and staff please expand on some of the key things that we can do to address our fiscal responsibilities around climate change?
I'm going to ask Mr. Gaffigan to do that. He's our expert in the area, but we've got some good ideas.
Great.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at our high-risk designation on climate, it's about the fiscal exposure. So you're spot on in terms of highlighting that. And the federal government can provide a lot of incentives to build resilience and save those dollars that you're talking about. It can also be an integrator for all the stakeholders who are involved in that, and also provide key information. Those are three sort of key areas of resilience that we can build in. But I think the fiscal exposure is a huge issue, and it's why we put it on the high-risk list in 2013.
Yeah, I think a couple specifics. One would be to give better climate information to state and local officials so that they can make better planning decisions. Also to work with them to build the better building codes in. You know, the federal government does not control the building codes. And so it's very important that the federal government try to provide information to get those building codes up to speed. And also the federal government needs to set priorities. There's a lot to do here. And we need priorities. We can't, you know, that would help us to make the most optimal investments.
Absolutely. Well, thank you. And we really appreciate your work on this issue. And as I said, this is a significant investment in the future of this country and mitigating financial risk to our country's fiscal health, but also to ensuring that our communities have a livable planet. And so we appreciate your work highlighting that. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Chair recognizes Mr. Palmer from Alabama for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.